New York had a way of feeling both alive and completely hollow, depending on where you stood. That night, Jake Gyllenhaal stood somewhere in between. The final dress rehearsal for his new Broadway production had just ended. The applause, the smiles, the press waiting out front, all of it felt distant. Like noise on the other side of a thick window. He needed air, not more conversation. So he left quietly through the stage door, hoodie pulled up, walking fast into the cold. A few blocks down, just past a shuttered corner diner, he spotted a figure slouched on a bench beneath a flickering streetlight. The man was still not sleeping, not begging, just sitting. A cardboard sign leaned against his knees. The ink was faded, but the words were readable. I used to matter. Jake paused. He didn't know why. Something about that phrase stopped him cold. There wasn't a plea in it, just a quiet truth. The man didn't lift his head or speak. But Jake stepped closer anyway. Hey, he said softly. You good? The man stirred, glanced up. His face was weathered, older. Tired. His eyes, though sharp, clear. Strangely familiar. Jake couldn't place the feeling, but it hit him like a shiver through bone. I'm not cold, the man murmured. But thanks. Still, Jake unzipped his bag and pulled out a folded blanket one a fan had handed him earlier backstage. Soft, warm, untouched. Take it, Jake said, kneeling down. Might help tonight. The man hesitated, then accepted it with quiet hands. Their eyes met again, brief, searching. Something passed between them, but neither spoke it aloud. Jake stood, gave a small nod, and started to walk away. Then, behind him, the man's voice came low, almost like an afterthought. Thank you, Jake. Jake froze. He turned slightly, heart knocking once against his ribs, but the man was already settling back into the bench, silent again. Jake didn't speak. He just walked, but the weight of that moment, the voice, the eyes, the name followed him all the way home. The city never slept, but Jake couldn't either. It was well past midnight when he finally sat alone in his living room, the hum of traffic below mixing with the low, restless buzz in his mind. The man's face, those sharp, sorrowful eyes kept flashing behind his eyelids every time he blinked. Not in a haunting way. In a familiar one. Jake had met hundreds, thousands of people over the years. Fans, producers, press. Faces blurred into crowds. But not this one. This man had weight. A quiet gravity that wouldn't let go. He opened his laptop, fingers moving almost without thought. His browser filled with news tabs, missing persons databases, local shelter directories. He didn't know what exactly he was searching for. Just, something. Something to explain why that man knew his name, and why the sound of it spoken by him felt like a thread pulled from Jake's own past. At 1:42 a.m., he gave up the digital trail. He reached instead for something tangible, a dusty storage bin pulled from the back of his closet. Inside were yellowed playbills, Polaroids, old notes, and a stack of school photos bound by a cracked rubber band. He flipped through them in silence. There it was, a photo from high school. Jake at 15, awkwardly tall and smiling too wide in a group of theater kids on a worn-down stage. Behind them, standing off to the side in a maroon sweater and khakis, was a man, unsmiling. Arms folded. Eyes steady. Jake leaned closer. The grainy quality didn't hide what mattered most, the eyes. Still clear. Still sharp. Jake's breath caught in his throat. He didn't know the man's name anymore. It had been so long, but he knew what he was. His first acting teacher. The man who taught him to listen between the lines. Who stayed after school to run monologues with a shy, unsure teenager who wasn't sure if he'd ever be enough. Who once said, "Talent can sparkle. But truth shines in silence." Jake had never forgotten that, but somehow, he had forgotten him. That he returned to the bench the next evening, wrapped in his coat, hood pulled low, the same streetlight flickered, the same diner stood silent and dark, but the bench was empty. No man. No sign. Just the blanket now neatly folded resting where he had Saturday. Jake stared at it for a long time before picking it up. Folded inside, he found something else, a torn sheet of notebook paper. No greeting. No signature. Just one line, in careful handwriting. "You never know when you've changed someone's ending." He read it twice. Then a third time, and the silence of that moment was louder than any applause he'd heard in years. Over the next week, Jake returned every night. Sometimes he waited an hour. Sometimes 3. Each time the bench was empty. No trace of the man. The folded blanket sat untouched on the third night, soaked through from rain. He brought it home that time, drying it carefully as if it were made of something sacred. Still, the thought wouldn't leave him. Why was he there? Why now? The man had used his name. Looked him in the eye. Left a message. This wasn't random, and yet, the past, that fragile, foggy stretch of early teenage memory, gave Jake no clues. No last names. No records. Just feelings. Phrases. A sense of someone who once shaped him, then disappeared like chalk in the rain, until a message arrived. It came not by email, or fan mail, or public comment. It was a handwritten envelope slid under the locked back door of the theater during rehearsals. No address. No stamp. Just his name, Jake, inside, a short note: "You knew how to speak truth before you learned to pretend, you helped more than you know. But I didn't come to be found, that I came to remember what it feels like to matter, and now I do." There was no signature. Only one more line, written lightly on the back: "Don't stop listening." Jake read it under the dim light of the dressing room mirror, his reflection half lit, half shadowed. His script rested on the table beside it, lines he had rehearsed 100 times, but for the first time, he whispered them differently, softer, honest, not performed. Felt that he looked at himself. Then at the letter again. And smiled. Not with joy, but with quiet understanding. This wasn't over, but it had started with one forgotten bench, under one lonely streetlight, and somehow, that was enough. Rain fell harder the next evening. Jake stood under the awning of the theater's side entrance, watching rivulets of water dance on the sidewalk. His coat was damp at the shoulders, but he didn't care. He was waiting not for a car, or for a friend, but for something. A moment. A sign. A second meeting that hadn't come. It had been 4 nights since he found the letter under the door. 4 nights since he'd read the words, "You helped more than you know." And each day since, he'd gone through the motions of rehearsal with a quiet, inward pull. His co-stars noticed. So did the director. "You okay?" they'd ask. "I'm good," Jake would answer, but it wasn't good. It was unfinished. There was something about that man that night that still scratched at the door of his memory like a voice just behind a curtain. And then, something unexpected arrived. A call from a local shelter. Jake's team occasionally supported a place that provided meals, mental health check-ins, and sleeping cots for unhoused men and women. They had a routine relationship with Jake's foundation, but this time the woman on the line sounded different. Careful. Curious. "There's something I thought you should see," she said. "Someone dropped it off. Said it was personal. Jake arrived that afternoon. No cameras. No publicist. Just him and a hoodie pulled low. The shelter was quiet, half full. Staffers moved about in gentle rhythms, offering warm drinks, folding laundry, handing out blankets. The woman from the phone met him near the back office. She handed him a sealed manila folder. "No name," she said. "But they said it was, for the one who remembers." Jake took it with both hands, sat down in the empty office, and opened it slowly. Inside, a series of photocopied pages. Notes. Schedules. A yellowed newspaper clipping, and then a staff ID badge, old. Bent at the corners. But clear, the photo showed a younger version of the man from the bench. Clean-shaven, eyes sharp. Underneath, Callahan, Richard. Drama faculty. Glendale High School. Jake stared. Callahan. A name now wrapped in time. A name that unlocked something deeper. He remembered now. The man who stayed after school to help him with Shakespeare. The man who noticed when he skipped lunch and slipped him a granola bar without a word. The man who clapped only once after Jake's first standing ovation at the school play, and that one clap meant more than all the cheers in the auditorium. He turned the clipping over. It was a short, sad article. Dated over a decade ago. A quiet retirement announcement. No details. Just that he had left the profession suddenly. Personal reasons. Jake sat back in his chair. So it was him, but why now? Why come out of nowhere, leave notes, appear and disappear like a whisper? He thought back to the bench. The sign, "I used to matter." And something clicked. This wasn't just about recognition. It was about being seen again, even just once. Later that evening, Jake did something rare. He pulled out his old journals, the ones he hadn't touched in years. In the margins of his notes from early editions, he found scribbled lines. "You have to mean it, even in silence. Mr. Callahan, acting isn't pretending. It's remembering truth." Callahan, first workshop. He had forgotten the name. But not the words. They were woven into everything he become. He turned to a blank page and wrote, "You remembered me first. Let me return the favor." Then he picked up the phone and called his assistant. "I need to put out a message," he said. "Not a press release. Just a quiet call. Can we do that?" The next day, a message appeared on Jake's Instagram story. No image. Just text, black on white. "If you're reading this, the bench wasn't the end. I remember you. You mattered then, you matter still. I hope you'll come back, same place. I'll be there." No name. No details. No public clue as to who it was for, but Jake didn't care if no one understood that he wasn't talking to them. That he was talking to the man who helped him find his voice long before the world ever heard it. The night Jake returned to the bench, the wind carried a different kind of silence. It wasn't the empty quiet of isolation, it was the full, heavy quiet of expectation. He'd left the post 24 hours earlier. One soft message, typed without flair, shared only as a story. No tags, no name, no image. He wasn't even sure if he would see it, but Jake had a feeling. So, once again, he walked without an entourage. Through the heart of New York, past the echo of passing taxis and hurried conversations, until the city faded just enough to hear his own thoughts. The bench was there. Still rusted. Still under that stubborn flickering streetlight. At first glance, it was empty. Jake's heart dipped. He exhaled, then stepped closer. That's when he saw it. A small envelope, weighted down by a smooth gray stone, lay centered on the bench. His name was scrawled on the front, not printed. Not typed, written. The way it had been all those years ago, on crumpled homework pages and late permission slips. Callahan's handwriting. Jake sat slowly, hands steady despite the tremble in his chest. He lifted the stone, picked up the envelope, and opened it. Inside was a single sheet. Folded once, carefully. Like it was meant to be opened with purpose, that he unfolded it and read, "Jake, when I saw you that night, I didn't intend to speak that I wasn't there for you. Not really that I was there to say goodbye to a city that forgot I existed, that I walked past dozens of faces that day, most didn't look twice, but you looked at me like I was still somebody. That's the kind of actor you are. You don't just memorize lines, you see people, you remember them, and I couldn't leave without letting you know you didn't get here alone. Part of you was built in my classroom that I lost the rest of my life after that. Teaching. Home. Identity, but seeing what you've become, it gave back a piece of me I thought was gone forever. That's enough that I won't be found again. That's not the plan, but I left something for you. I in the place where you first stood on stage. Callahan. Jake read the letter twice. Then a third time, the weight of it pressed deeper with each pass, not in pain, but in meaning. That he remembered the auditorium at Glendale High, the squeaky wood floor, the crooked curtain rod, the cold metal chairs in the third row where his mother sat opening night. That he hadn't stepped foot there in nearly 20 years, but somehow, the letter turned that distance into a door. 3 days later, Glendale, California. The school had changed. New signage. Fresh paint. A shinier gym. But the auditorium, the heart of Jake's early life, remained much the same. That he was let in quietly by the new principal, who blinked with disbelief when Jake introduced himself but asked no questions. Jake thanked him, asked for 10 minutes alone, and stepped inside. The air was exactly as he remembered, a faint mix of sawdust, forgotten fabric, and dreams. That he climbed the small wooden stage, his boots echoing in the hollow belly of the room. The curtain was drawn, but not tightly. A slight parting in the center created a gap just enough to let in a sliver of light from the catwalk window above, and there, in the wings, just behind the curtains, rested a dusty old prop chest. That he knelt, opened it. Inside was a manila folder marked, Monologues 2002-4. And beneath it, a spiral notebook. One Jake hadn't seen in decades. That he flipped to the back. There, in Callahan's handwriting, was a final note, to the boy who learned to become a man while pretending to be others. I saw the real you first. That was always enough. Jake sat on the stage for a long time after that. Not crying. Not smiling. Just, remembering, not the fame. Not the success. But the simple, fragile beginning, the moment someone looked at him not as a performer, but as a person, and it made all the difference. Jake Gyllenhaal returned to New York a different man, not changed in the obvious ways. He still laughed during cast warm-ups, still gave firm handshakes and remembered names. But something in him had been rewired. There was a steadiness in his step, a weight in his gaze, like a man who had found something precious that he didn't realize had been missing. The notebook sat in his bag. Callahan's letter had never left his pocket. That he wasn't sure what he was meant to do with either until the night his castmate, a 19-year-old understudy fresh out of conservatory, came into the green room in tears. Jake found her sitting near the hallway, trying to hide behind a fake potted plant. Bad note? He asked gently. Crouching beside her, she shook her head. I got a message from home. My old drama teacher passed away. He was the only reason I ever dared to act. Jake didn't speak at first. Then, after a pause, he reached into his bag, pulled out the notebook, and handed it to her. What's this? Something left behind by someone who once did the same for me. She opened it slowly, reading the first few lines. Her hands shook. Jake stood You can keep it for a few days. Just don't forget who gave you permission to begin." She nodded. That night, Jake stayed long after curtain call. Long after the crowd had roared, the cast had changed, and the city had gone back to noise. He sat alone in the dressing room, Callahan's voice in his head again, that quiet, stern patience that once turned a shy kid into a bold artist. That he realized something then: Callahan hadn't disappeared, that he had just faded quietly, waiting for someone to say he was still there. And now Jake had the chance to be that voice for someone else. 2 months later, interior, a black box theater in Brooklyn. The lights were dimmed, the chairs mismatched. A paper sign outside the door read, "The Echo Project, one night. 7 monologues. All true." Jake sat in the back row. That he wasn't performing, that he wasn't even listed on the program. This was their night. 7 students from underserved communities, ages 15 to 22, each stepping onto a stage for the first time, not to impress, but to express. Each one had written their monologue under a quiet mentorship program Jake had launched privately, funded personally, and named with deliberation. The Callahan stage. It wasn't a non-profit, it wasn't a publicity tool, it was a whisper into the dark. "I see you. You matter. Tell your story." The final performer was a boy named Elijah, 17, foster care, quiet as stone when he first arrived. Tonight, he stood under the warm light in a borrowed blazer, hands shaking only slightly, and said, "I used to think I was the side character in everyone else's life, until someone asked me who I was, and didn't laugh when I answered." When the lights dimmed after the final bow, there was no thunder of applause. Just a soft standing ovation. One slow clap at a time. Jake watched, his hand pressed to his chest, holding the letter. He didn't need the stage. He had helped build one. Backstage, a girl approached him. Maybe 16. Wide eyes. Nervous smile. "Mr. Gyllenhaal," she asked. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you start this program?" Jake paused. Then handed her the folded newspaper clipping, the one about Callahan's quiet retirement. She read it. Looked back at him. "He was your teacher?" Jake nodded. "I forgot his name," he admitted. "But not what he gave me." Then he pulled out the last page from the notebook, photocopied, carefully preserved, and handed it to her. "I saw the real you first." That was always enough. That night, Jake stood alone again under a streetlight, not the same one as before. This one burned steady. No flicker. No sign of decay. That he closed his eyes and whispered softly, as if someone might still hear it from somewhere beyond, "You didn't vanish. You lived in every word they said tonight." 3 weeks passed. The voices of the students from the Echo Project still echoed in Jake Gyllenhaal's mind, especially late at night, when the city dulled to a hum and his thoughts returned to that single bench, that folded blanket, and the man whose quiet presence had reshaped everything. Jake had not seen Richard Callahan since that first night. No more notes arrived. No more signs. But the silence no longer felt like an ending. It felt like a permission. A letting go. Jake sat in his apartment one gray morning, the rain tapping gently on the windowpanes like it had that night so long ago. The notebook still rested on his shelf, carefully restored. Next to it now stood a small black frame, housing the final note Callahan had left behind in Glendale. "You never know when you've changed someone's ending." Jake had read those words so many times they felt etched into his own skin. He'd built something with them, not for recognition, but for redemption. And now, it was time to do something quieter. Something personal. He made a call. Then another. 2 weeks later, he boarded a plane. Glendale, California. Sunnydale Cemetery. The grass was short, the sky overcast, the earth quiet. Jake carried no cameras, no entourage. Just flowers. And a laminated plaque tucked gently into a leather satchel that he wasn't even sure if Callahan had been buried here. Records were vague, and some said he'd vanished without family. But this was where Callahan once lived, once taught, once gave parts of himself to dozens of forgotten kids. Including one boy who remembered every word. Jake walked toward the far corner of the cemetery where forgotten stones leaned quietly into the ground like worn books, and there, beneath a modest, nearly eroded stone, he stopped. There was no name, just numbers, birth, and silence where a legacy should have been. Jake knelt and placed the flowers. Then he reached into the satchel and pulled out the plaque. It was simple. Elegant. Engraved with care. In memory of Richard Clyhan, teacher, mentor, storyteller. You taught us how to speak truth before we learned to pretend. You saw who we were. You helped us believe you still mattered. He placed it at the base of the stone, weighted it with a flat stone from the stage at Glendale High, and he stayed, not long, just long enough to say the only thing that hadn't yet been spoken aloud: thank you. That evening, Jake posted a single photo to his social media. A hand holding the plaque, rain on the edge of the frame.No location. No tags. The caption read, "He changed my beginning. I'll protect his ending. Some heroes don't wear capes, they wear chalk, dust and silence." The post quietly went viral, but Jake didn't stay online to watch it. He was already back at rehearsal, not just as an actor, but as a mentor, passing notes to a nervous first-timer, whispering encouragement before their cue, and in every voice he guided, in every stage he helped light, in every trembling hand he held steady. Richard Callahan lived on, because in the end, some people don't disappear. They become the story that someone else dares to tell.